This panel is proudly sponsored by Globalization Partners.
Hey there, Run and Remote. We are back for our next panel, How Enterprise Companies Are Transitioning into Hybrid. And this panel is actually sponsored by our platinum sponsor, Globalization Partners. Hire anyone, anywhere, quickly and easily. Use their AI-driven, fully compliant global employer of record platform powered by their in-house worldwide HR experts. Leave the complexities of global employment to the named industry leader that consistently attains 97% customer satisfaction ratings. With Globalization Partners, you can succeed faster. All right, without further ado, I'd like to introduce Sacha Connor. She's the moderator for this panel, and I'll be back in a little bit with some questions from the audience. See ya.
Thanks, Mike. So I'm so happy to be here today to get to introduce all of you to some of my clients and friends as we talk about the role of remote work and the buzzword of 2021, which is hybrid work within large organizations. We are going to be talking about some pre-prepared questions that we have for the panel, but feel free to put your own questions into the Q&A, and we will leave time at the end to discuss those upvoted questions. So I'm Sacha Connor. I'm the CEO of Virtual Work Insider. My company teaches hybrid and remote teams how to lead and collaborate and communicate and build culture across distance. So I founded Virtual Work Insider 2.5 years ago, but before that, I worked at a large enterprise. I was a marketing director at the $6 billion Clorox company for 14 years. And 8 of those years, I was a remote work pioneer, leading large hybrid teams from 3,000 miles and 3 time zones away. So today's topic is really near and dear to my heart. So let's introduce the panelists. We are first going to start with Priscilla Tuan. So Priscilla is the Senior Vice President of Marketing for Sovos Brands. It's a company that owns food brands such as Noosa Yogurt and Rayo's Pasta Sauce. So I have some of your product here, Priscilla.
Thanks for the product demo.
Priscilla is an innovator and a creator, and she was leading Sovos teams across 4 time zones and 4 office sites even before COVID. And even during COVID, they acquired and are in the process of integrating an additional new food company. And Priscilla's not just a client, but she's also a friend and mentor. So I had the privilege of working with her for many years at the Clorox company, where she led $1 billion business. So next, we're going to go to John Carroll. So John is the Vice President of Global HR for Guest Worldwide, which is a $1 billion division of Cisco that is a leading provider of hospitality products for the lodging industry. So that includes things like linens and soaps and shampoos and so much more. So Guest Worldwide has 800 employees in the US and about 200 or so across the rest of the globe. And given the pandemic impact to the lodging industry, they had to be so inventive about how they shored up their business during the pandemic. And John's executive team had to manage a hybrid workforce, including frontline workers, throughout the pandemic. And then I'd like to introduce you to Mandy McNamar. So she's actually on the phone right now, because oftentimes as we're working in a virtual world, the technology is not always our friend. So we have rigged this. So Mandy is calling in via phone. And Mandy is the engineering senior manager for Raytheon Technologies in their Missiles and Defense division. So she is responsible for 150 people on her team, and she also leads her diversity and inclusion efforts for her division. And Mandy has done a superb job under very challenging circumstances. So not only has she been leading a hybrid team throughout the pandemic, but she had to simultaneously merge 2 large teams together that never met each other in person. So we are about to dive deep in here. We're first going to start with, I'm going to go around Robin and have each of the panelists give you a little bit more context about the type of work that they do and the role of remote and hybrid work prior to the pandemic and then into the pandemic. Then we're going to go deep into the challenges and successes that they've seen as they've had to pivot. And then we're going to talk about what does the future hold. So we're going to actually first start with Mandy now. So Mandy on the phone, if you can just give us a little bit more context about the company and the work that you do and the role of remote and hybrid.
Well, I am still here and I haven't stopped trying getting on. So hopefully I can be there. But I do work for Raytheon Missiles Defense, which is a business under Raytheon Technologies. And we provide end-to-end solutions for detecting, tracking, and engaging threats. So really broad portfolio. And my role as department leader, I'm leading a large technical team. And as a larger business, we went through a merge. So prior to the pandemic, we were mostly there in person. And so we had to shift and really change how we did work. We have a lot of people that are essential workers that needed to be there. And then where we could, we tried to flex and allow people to work from home, either partially or fully. So it was quite the change from what we were used to.
And to give some scale for Raytheon Technologies, am I right? It's about 70,000 people in total, like very, very large organization.
Yes, it's very large. So our RMD business unit is 30,000. And then when you go up to the RTX level, it's over 100,000. So it's a very large scale company.
Thanks, Mandy. So we'll move on to Priscilla. Any additional context that you want to provide the listeners?
Sure. So to share a little bit more about my role now, I work for Sovos Brands, which, as Sacha mentioned, has 4 different brand business units, and we are in 4 different locations, 5 if you include the headquarters here in Berkeley. So very distributed teams. This was prior to COVID, but within the teams that were dedicated to brands, they were co-located in different locations like Denver or Austin or Montclair, New Jersey. So what has happened in the midst of COVID is we were training with Sacha. Actually, we hired her to help us think through how to approach virtual leadership, how to lead across distance and time zones and be influential and in the room, even if you're not in the room. But I think the game changed when we actually moved to COVID, because now everybody was remote, even within the sites. And that created an opportunity for us to really press in and test the waters on things that Sacha had taught us to do. And I would say one of the things that we've been really interested in looking at is distance bias. And that distance bias that is very much at work, East Coast versus West Coast, time zone versus, co-located. It's created an equal playing field for my team. And so the benefit of that is in the equal playing field, my team is now on equal footing no matter what time zone, and we're always one square on a box on the call on MS Teams. And that's created an equality and a common space for us to exchange ideas. And the team has mentioned that they're actually closer. They feel much more part of a team than they did actually prior to COVID, which has been a nice side benefit. I also work across different functions a lot, so I'm happy to discuss what that's like. When you're in one function, it's one thing, but when you're actually coordinating across different business units and across different functions in the work that we do, I think that's been an interesting challenge as well.
Yeah, so I love what you brought up around the distance bias. So this is something that the Neuro Leadership Institute talks about in terms of our brain's natural tendency to put more importance on the people and things closer to us than those that are further away. And as we've been working in these fully remote environments, it's been nice to actually have some of that get washed away, but that's a big watch out, is that it's going to rear its ugly head again as we get into hybrid work. And so we'll talk about that as we get into some of the challenges with that transition. So I'm going to move us over to John. So any other additional context that you'd like to provide?
Yeah, a little bit. Sacha, thank you. Great to be here today. I want to make sure we're clear on which Cisco. It's Cisco, the food distribution organization. I know there's 2, so just want to make sure we're clear on that. I think the uniqueness for us is in Guest Worldwide, as you mentioned, we are the leading distributor and manufacturer, amenities, textiles, and other fixtures and things that hotels need, as we're also learning part of the in the pandemic, new industries we've been able to actually tap into, which has been awesome. But I think the opportunity for us has been, how do we service our customers where the whole industry went down? And the unique part for us within Guess Worldwide, within Cisco, we're the only non-food part of the business. We're also truly the only global player within the business. So my operations go everywhere from North America, multiple sites, to Europe and into Asia, China, and the Hong Kong in terms of our areas of focus. So we felt the effects of this, right at the end there at 19, as Asia started to feel the effects of the pandemic, and it just kind of made its way around. And then how that morphed with all the hotels and airlines, which were predicated on our business. We want people to go to meetings. We want people in hotels, whether it's leisure or business related. It just changed the whole dynamic for us as an organization. I think the key for us is it's a culture that's really been very family oriented. It feels that way as an associate, and you take that, and our headquarters is out in middle of New Jersey in the U.S. You take that and kind of separate everybody all at once. It was an adjustment period. We've got a number of frontline folks, essential workers in our distribution sites and manufacturing, as well as some other isolated corporate folks. We've had folks going at this since day one, really kept our business moving to a large degree. So we couldn't be where we are today without them. But it's been an adjustment, and as we get through it, I'll share some of our war stories, but absolutely some of the progress that we've been making and some of the key learnings. So thank you.
And I think that's a common thread between the three of you, is that you all had some frontline workers working, whether they were in manufacturing sites or labs or things like that, throughout the pandemic. So this hybrid situation has been happening before the pandemic for your organization, throughout the pandemic, and then we'll talk about what that means for the future. So let's stay with you, John, and talk a little bit more about how that transition went down during the pandemic and moving to more fully remote teams with some hybrid aspect to it. So back to the fact that you really needed to innovate and you needed to pivot, especially your sales force needed to continue to be able to sell and support your customers while they couldn't call on them in person. So could you tell us about some of those lessons that you learned about being able to innovate and sell and even influence across distance?
Yeah, sure. I mean, probably like for many, it was an adjustment early going. The first few weeks, it's kind of, what's this world order we've now been put ourselves into or been placed in. As I mentioned, parts of my business had to keep working. It was essential to keep our product moving, service our customers, no matter where they were around the globe. One of the keys was just how are we going to communicate? Just associate to associate, peer to peer, let alone manager to manager. For my sales teams, they're driven. Their DNA is face to face with the customer. How does that shift? How do I do this sales thing virtually now? Very different dynamic, and we're all over the U.S. In terms of our presence. But again, and then with the customer changes, customers kind of going into having a retreat just because of the impact. And again, in terms of the industry in which we operate and who we serve, we had a lot of adjusting based on what the customer's needs were and how do we need to service them. And in some cases, we couldn't call on them. There was a lot of that went on early on. Over time, things have begun to loosen up, fortunately. But there was a period there. We were kind of at a standstill on where do we go? A lot of it, though, forced us. I'm part of a great leadership team. I've got a great bunch of associates all over the globe. So, it is very collaborative, had been, even, I think probably even more so, was one of the new learnings. We had to collaborate much more differently than we did. Part of that goes with the communication. Part of that goes with new technologies and tool sets. Video conferencing, such as we're doing, that was a whole new experience, as I'm sure many can attest to. But then to do that minute to minute, hour to hour, day to day, it's a little bit like Groundhog Day if you've seen the movie. It was a constant grind. But we found our way, especially coming together as a leadership group and meeting more than we ever did, just to keep each other sane. But more importantly, I think just understanding what's going on in the business, because things were moving so quickly for us. So there was that constant communication from our side at a senior leader level, then how we had to operate functionally, and then actually cross-functionally. There's so many interdependencies in how we operate between finance, distribution, procurement, the business units that drive our business. We've got three legs of Guess Worldwide, and our amenities and textiles and sales and distribution. They had to work and operate much more differently. And then how do you work and keep everybody engaged? So we found ourselves more town halls, either as a collective organization, as a function, making sure we've got a touch and presence with our frontline associates. So there's a lot that went on. And oh, by the way, moms and dads, dealing with school and childcare, having a better understand how we flex schedules and adjust. I'm not commuting, but my days are still really full, and probably even more so. So it was an adjustment. It still is an adjustment. But I think little by little, communication was the big key for us.
And I think as I worked with your top 65 leaders, a couple things that came up. One of the things you were talking about is that cross-functional work, that cross-divisional work. So understanding really who all the stakeholders are in the people that need to work together and communicate together. And so really being very intentional about mapping out those stakeholders. And then the second piece that you talked about in terms of the meeting overload. And so one of the things we had discussed was that needing that balance between synchronous and asynchronous communication, which for a lot of large enterprises that we work with, that idea of thinking about communication in those two buckets is kind of new, because we're all used to working very synchronously together. And I remember your team, John, really glommed on to the idea of using video mail as an asynchronous way to communicate.
Yeah, I mean, folks have gotten really creative, especially as from a Cisco perspective, using Teams really as our platform. That is our collaboration tool now in many regards. It's our talk tool. It's our IM instant message. You almost find yourself not using the phone anymore. Everything's online, but and because you don't have the water cooler chat or post a meeting, physical meeting, you got to find ways, Sacha, to your point, is kind of where are my key points of contact? Who are my stakeholders? I got to get in with them and start making decisions, because there just hasn't been the time to let things maybe drag on, but just come to some decisions. So it's been really important, again, that collaborative effort, probably more than we've ever gone through in the past.
So I'm going to move us back to Mandy on the phone. So let's talk about Raytheon and the team that you were working through that had not just the new hybrid format, but you had these two large teams coming together that had never met before. So how were you approaching those challenges of learning to work in that hybrid format with the two new teams?
Yeah, and I think as you guys were just discussing, a lot of the things that you said, John, resonate with me too. We were so used to just seeing each other face-to-face in person. And so going through a pandemic and then going through a merge presented a lot of challenges, and we couldn't rely on just getting on a plane and going to talk to people and having the leaders make those high-level decisions of how we're going to come together and how we're going to merge. And Sacha, that's when we did reach out to you to help our leaders and help our teams with some tools that we could use to get more comfortable on camera. It wasn't something that we used because of the nature of our work. We really hadn't been in front of the camera in that way and done as much remote connecting. So I think, through some of those tools and ability to actually make key decisions, technical decisions in that way, and also having the knowledge that some people are still in the office and making sure that we're connecting both the people that are on site in the office with the people that are remote, really helped us in that journey to keep going. And looking back at the year, we had the year anniversary of our merge. It was a really productive and successful year. And it was, everyone experienced it a little bit different based on where they were in terms of their own journey. We're still growing. You guys mentioned the sort of back-to-back meetings. I think right now the pendulum has swung where we had this kind of concern and this comfort curve with being on camera. And now a lot of people are feeling that fatigue of a lot of Zoom calls, a lot of video conferencing. So we are trying to find that balance and scale back and find out what works to make sure we're connecting and including all teams, but also realizing some stuff can be done asynchronous while other things need to be done synchronous.
And what Mandy is referring to kind of builds on what John was saying earlier about, Mandy's organization. When we worked together, it was June 2020 was the first session we did. And that was the first time they were using Zoom as a video conferencing tool, right? A lot of people I think that are listening in right now might be kind of surprised at some of these large organizations that they often take for granted in terms of tech tools. These large organizations are still coming up the curve with some of what many might think are foundational technology tools on how to use. And so I know, Mandy, you and your team came so far from June to then the next session we did was like February 2021, and you were pros at that point.
Yeah, and I will say, the company stepped up and gave us a lot of the assets that we needed for those that were able to work from home. And this is no indication of the company right now. This is a me thing. This is my personal issue right now with getting on. But yeah, we've really come far. And Sacha, I do thank you for working with us and coaching us through some of those challenges.
And I think it's important that we think about what's next in terms of, Priscilla even brought this up at the beginning too, in terms of right now, for those organizations who have been fully remote for this last 14 months, everybody's been on an equal playing field with our own individual squares on the computer screen. And as we move into hybrid teams, or if you're currently in the hybrid team, how do you keep those meetings to have an equal playing field? And that could even go as far as having everybody still calling in from their own personal location if you have a group of people that are a part of the meeting that can't be there in person, trying to overcome back to that distance bias we talked about earlier. So I'm going to move us to Priscilla. So back to what Priscilla was talking about in terms of, the strategy for Sovos is to acquire companies and help grow them. And so that requires some distance in terms of the locations of the manufacturing plants and where the brands are located. And I know, Priscilla, you have done a ton of travel pre-COVID to help integrate teams, to work with your creative agencies across the US. And one mindset that I hear all the time from leaders that are new to virtual work is that you can't effectively collaborate or innovate without being together in person. So you lead marketing, you lead new product innovation in an industry with very tangible goods, food. So how were you able to keep innovation and an idea pipeline healthy when you couldn't be together in person?
Yeah, that's a great question. I'm going to just take a step back so you have a picture of what my world is like. So we're a serial inquisitive organization, meaning when I started, we had one brand, and now we have four in the series of 4 years. So integration changes like the pace of life. Everything is always different. And we specialize in finding unique brands with untold stories that have amazing, delicious profiles like Rayo's or Noosa, Michelangelo's, or most recently Birch Benders, and then growing them to scale. So that's why these brands are actually in different pockets of the United States, because that's where they were born and bred. And that's part of how they came up in the world. So we've always been hybrid. I think the question of innovating and collaborating has always been a tough one throughout like my whole career, because being in the room, being able to bounce ideas off each other, trying to do whiteboarding, doing dot exercising, it's a harder endeavor. And I won't say that it's easier to do virtually, but I will say it's very possible and productive to do virtually. And I think part of it is having the tools, having the prep. But the other piece of it is just like figuring out how you do things differently. And I'll give one example of this. I think innovation, brainstorming, and evaluation is probably the hardest one, textbook-wise, to actually do virtually. But what we had to do, because we were in a period of time of like 15 months where we actually, innovation is our lifeblood because we grow organically and inorganically. So our innovation pipeline is a big part of what my job is dedicated to. We actually did an innovation table virtually. What is that? That is cross-functional. So you have supply chain, R&D, insights, brand, GMs, sales, all in different locations, tasting product, brainstorming, building on each other's ideas. So we used a variety of like hard samples that we had. So there was prep work. We actually had to send out individual samples to each person in each location that they were at. So that was a lot of prep work. But the silver lining, like I said before, is when you do an innovation table live, sometimes it's the loudest voice that actually dominates. But in a virtual setting where we were all equal squares and we're we had our time to sample our foods and like concept and brainstorm and put it on a virtual whiteboard, put our comments in the notes. It actually really brought out some really great ideas because everybody's voice had a chance to be heard at the table. So I was really surprised by that. And I think it's actually probably more productive in the end than other in-person cuttings and tastings and innovation brainstorm sessions that I've done. It did take a lot of prep work, so I won't lie about that. There's a ton of prep work to be done to get all those samples out there.
Yeah, I think that that's with any virtual meeting. It actually forces additional kind of preparation and intentionality to it, which actually is probably a good thing for any meeting, right? And so you know, it sounded like there was some silver lining to it in terms of equal playing field to get people's ideas out on the table. So I've been in so many of those in-person post-it note sessions that you usually have in marketing and innovation meetings, where you know the more junior person or the less tenured person might have trouble actually jumping in or is trying to take all these cues from everyone else. Whereas if you're in this more of an equal playing field, did you feel like you were getting some more of those ideas from maybe some people that might not have spoken up otherwise?
Absolutely, because of text chat in the feed and also just like I said, being kind of equally sparsed out, I think that it really encourages people to participate and bring their true opinions to the forefront. One thing we haven't talked about yet, and maybe you're going to bring this up, Sacha, is aside from the hard skills on how to get work done, culture is a huge thing to think about because it's the lifeblood of who we are and how we build teams and how we get the work done. And one of the interesting things is we acquired a company named Birch Benders. It's a better for you pancake and waffle mix company, and had to not only evaluate, do due diligence, acquire, but then also, to Sacha's point earlier, integrate it into our ways of working at Sovos. So that was a really big challenge because for those, Mandy, you talked about like flying out a lot and trying to get two groups of people together. I would always fly, or people would always fly and be together in a room or like break bread together in order to build those connections and break down barriers and make sure that we can understand each other and build forward. So all of that has been done virtually, and that's been a really, having done it 4 times now, doing it virtually has been a really interesting adventure.
Well, let's use that to get into the conversation around upskilling and the importance of upskilling people in this new virtual environment, because I would say knowing how to build that culture across distance is a very important skill. And back to what is culture, and so what we've heard a lot about is this kind of conflating together culture and camaraderie building. So culture being, how do you set forth the values, attitudes, beliefs, behaviors of a team and role model and reinforce that. It's not about just one more virtual happy hour, right? So let's go on that theme a little bit more, on that skill of building culture. Mandy, is there anything you wanted to add about how you were thinking about building that culture as a skill within your group that was merging together, kind of like Priscilla was integrating multiple groups as well?
Yeah, we thought about this a lot, and I'd say it's still a work in progress, and we've made some strides. One of the things that we did is we did have some spark time opportunities where we would just chat and create that time where we could get to know each other. But we'd also, when we would do hiring events, sometimes we would take people from both teams. So you're actually working with them. And then the dialogue pre and post those meetings can be, have that free-forming discussion where you really do form connections and you get to find your commonalities and what you think about things. So for us, that culture, we did plan a few things, but then we also tried to integrate it and set it to the work that we're already doing. That also came with trying to drive some initiatives across the teams from different sites that didn't really know each other, and they only know each other still virtually.
So I like that idea again about crossing silos. So pairing people up across silos to get to know each other on a human level. And then by building that trust and that relationship, then that will also help with productivity and being able to work together as well. So John, anything you wanted to add about that skill around culture building across distance?
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely been evolving. I don't think we're there yet. I mean, we're trying to figure out the new future, not the new normal, what the new future is, especially in the context of culture. It was one, as I said, we're all used to office personnel being being in the office together, doing everything together, and then you go separate that quickly. I think we've figured out our rub points. What it's also forced is how we think about process, how we get things done. We got to be more effective, more timely in decision making. Maybe instead of you can run down to the hallway to go talk to your leader about, hey, I need a decision, boss, on this or that. No, we need to empower and make others feel accountable, or maybe responsible, however you want to look at it. No, this is your opportunity. Maybe make a call, help us out, because we need to keep moving, and we got to keep moving quickly. For us, that's been a key. It's just we did things for a lot of ways for a long time, and it's been a really good change for us. Is we've got to shift, we've got to pivot in how we make decisions, how we actually operate together, how we operate cross-functionally. Again, a lot of what's been said. So for us, that outside of the communication piece, and I think how we plan, it's been extremely important, as well as not only our day, but just what those initiatives may be, and just different ways of, again, back to that whole stakeholder. It's been important for us. Let's get those key folks in the room on the call and get moving. We still trip over ourselves every now and then, but that's been, I think, a lot of goodness in terms of our evolving as a culture. So still very collaborative. Everybody, there she is. Good to see you, Mandy.
Mandy.
It's very team-oriented organization, but again, I think we don't want to lose that either. But it's also just, again, how we go about what we do. I think this has pushed us in a really good way to start changing mindset a little bit on some things.
Yeah, and I think what I heard from what you said around culture for you is thinking about some of the values. So for example, the value that you hold dear is something about empowerment, right? Back to the empowerment and accountability. And then I heard you talk about the operating principles. So thinking about decision making and changing operating principles as part of the culture that you're trying to reinforce within the organization. So let's take that conversation now, and let's move even more forward looking now. So I want to hear from each of you in terms of what is your company thinking about with respect to a broader return to office this summer or fall? And if so, what are the challenges and opportunities that might bring with it, and how are you preparing for that? So let's start with Priscilla with that question on what's to come.
Sorry, I was shutting off because there's beeping on my computer. So what's to come? I mean, I don't think any of us really know what's to come. Let's just be totally honest, because while things are emerging and evolving, we're all working out what is return to the new normal, as John said. Is because it's not return to work as we know it. It's return to something different that we've all not experienced. But I've been trying to prepare my team by thinking through kind of a gradual progression back into how we actually get back to a hybrid where our expectations will be together some of the time and then remote other times within the locations. Obviously across distance will be remote for all the time. But it actually started with May Mental Health Month, which is this month, and just trying to get people in a mindset, because during COVID, there's a lot of stresses, right? There's like dogs and kids walking through your meetings, and like my daughter homeschools right outside here, so she's just separated by a door, and I never know if it's an emergency or something else. So just acknowledging that there's a lot of weight that we've all had to shoulder, and we've done an amazing job. Productivity has gone up, connectivity has gone up, and like people are exhausted, right? And they're having fatigue. So just taking a moment, we've had sort of a weekly engagement that we do during this month, including yoga and meditation and other things, just to get people kind of level set to say like, okay, we're going to make a shift and let's prepare for what's to come. I'm going to have my first in-person meeting with my leadership team next month. And believe it or not, most people haven't met each other in person, because some people joined new or some people hadn't joined right before COVID. So it's been a really interesting inventory just to say, hey, we built these relationships virtually, but people don't know how tall each other is. It's one of these interesting things that come up. So we're actually working towards a slow segue, and probably towards the fall, that's when we're really going to open it up and define how many days remote, how many days in person, and get back to kind of a normal cadence of what that looks like.
Right. I think what you're bringing up again is just that this last 14 months has not been normal remote work. So, I worked 8 years fully remotely for Clorox before the pandemic, and this is nothing like that, right? I was 2 locked doors between my kids and myself, and they had childcare and all of that. And so as we move into whatever is next, I think it is this big, it's going to be an experimental period to figure out what works well for the work, what works well for the employees.
Mm-hmm.
So Mandy, how are you thinking about that within Raytheon Technologies, within your team, or how the broader company's thinking about that?
Can you guys hear me okay? It's great to see you. Yes. All right, thank you. I was very persistent. And Priscilla, you just mentioned the height thing, and we were jokingly talking about when we see each other, we're going to have a big basketball game or a kickball game, and people were like, well, I'm not what you think I am. I'm 5'2". I'm like, well, I'm 6 feet. And it was I laughed when you said that because we had the same conversation, but it helped us get to know each other. So Raytheon as a company, our leaders have stated that they're trying to reduce our footprint. I think what they've seen is while people do have to be in the office, we have these essential workers. We have been very productive this year, and it allows for some inclusive environment, allows for that flexibility. So I think what we are going to see is a change and a shift. And I think that is for the better, right? And it's not going to be obviously for everyone, but I think we'll be able to make it work based on the success of last year.
Yeah, so as you mentioned, a footprint decrease. So we saw some headlines around 25%, even maybe real estate reduction in real estate for the company, and then figuring out what that means.
Yeah, absolutely.
Don, how about for your organization?
Well, we couldn't spell hybrid about 14 months ago, so it's totally different gears. It's very traditional just in terms of the office setting. So again, for us, it's been almost a direct 180. Like Priscilla, we've had kind of mental and health, physical awareness throughout the last theme of month, which for right or wrong, hopefully that's helped. We've had development topics we've had for our folks just in this remote world. Take care of yourself, maybe just for an hour a month was extremely important. Sat in on a leadership session yesterday with some of my folks, and one of the things that I think just the news flash was, I got to put out time for myself now. I'm getting kind of the burnout stress. I need to start blocking my calendar. It's kind of and myself included, just in the last month, new revelation. I need to put a pause and put myself in a timeout because you can't keep going at this pace. So it's already been shared, but I think that's going to be important for us. We're looking at probably, hopefully by mid-June, at least in the U.S., and it's for me, given the diversity of my markets, it's going to vary country to country. But generally speaking, we're hoping by mid-June, more a voluntary basis. That's what our parent company's been doing, along with some of our other businesses. See how that goes. We've got a lot staged, and I think we're going to be well prepared for that. But it's, hey, if you're comfortable coming in, go for it. I think to what's been noted, we've got a more formal process we'll be looking at in terms of flex work arrangement. And it's very much role-based. It's not, I want to work from home. Some of that will be considered, kind of personal needs and just balance. I think, striking that balance between home and work like that, if it's taught us anything, it's been that. So we know there's other things going on with associates maybe than we never knew before. So trying to be cognizant of that, but what roles may be required to be in office versus hybrid versus fully remote. So we've started that journey already. And again, hopefully similar, I think Mandy touched on, hopefully come fall, we're maybe going down that path of all the signs are going the right direction. Because again, I've got multiple states and probably like the others, multiple locations you got to consider. So it's a myriad of stuff right now, but we seem very positive on it. And that's what our folks are looking for. So we are listening. We are listening. It's a journey.
I think what this brings up, and for those of you listening who were on other conference discussions earlier today, there's not a one-size-fits-all situation here. So some organizations are saying this is the time to go fully remote now, and they're going to embrace that and get rid of all real estate. There are some that are saying that they're going to keep the real estate, but use the real estate in a very different way for collaboration centers. And there's a whole myriad of other solutions for this. And I think that we need to be open to the fact that every organization will need to create what makes sense for the culture that they're trying to build, for their mission, for their using their values and their behaviors as part of the culture as a filter for deciding what is right for the organization, and then being able to experiment. Because as Priscilla brought up earlier, this hasn't been normal. The fall's still not going to be fully normal, whatever that means anymore. We still have to be able to be agile and adjust and use this as a time of experimentation. So I'm now going to move us over to the Q&A portion of this. So I think Mike was going to come on screen and feed us some of the questions that have been upvoted. So is Mike there? Oh, here comes Mike. Great. Hello.
We've got a couple of different questions coming in, but I know there's one most likely that's more interested in the real estate angle, about if you are trying to reduce different offices, like what are different types of solutions for basically providing your employees with office space tools or office space support without just relying on putting them at home.
So is anybody interested in answering that first from the panel?
Yeah, I'll take an initial stab at it. You know, at least just speaking for our headquarters offices, we're starting to frame things out. You know, we've got a floor and a half just to kind of start. You know, is there an opportunity for us to kind of go to one single floor, just as scenario playing? We're going to probably come up with some kind of hoteling option for folks. Again, those that, because we do want folks coming into the office. You know, is the other thing I missed, you know, because we're kind of billing those as our collaboration days. It's not to do the tactical stuff of your job day in and day out. Come in functionally, cross-functionally, get together, much like Priscilla, you were sharing, kind of our time to kind of get stuff done together. Those are those days. So how do we do that? Well, we need, you know, some will have dedicated offices, workspaces. Others are just, hey, as you need to come in, we'll designate those. We got to probably look at a little bit of our layout in terms of, you know, what you need. You got to make a decision. Am I going to be, you know, or as we decide with associates, is your permanent residence in the office or at home? Well, you get this set of equipment based on that primary locale, and then we try to see what's available and make available enough so you can get the job done when you do need it, let's say come into the office versus my home setting. So we're working through the logistics on that, and obviously you got financials and other things you got to keep in mind too as we go through this, but you know, we see a little bit of flexibility going forward.
Anybody else want to add to the real estate piece? One thing that I've been hearing from some other clients as well is thinking about the real estate and wanting to use it as a collaboration hub. But if they don't want to get so structured to say everybody has to come in on Tuesdays and Wednesdays each week, then how do people know if other people are going to be in the office? It becomes a chicken or egg piece in terms of, well, I don't want to go in if nobody else is going to go in, so why would I commute? And so I know that there are some tech tools that are popping up to actually help with planning that in advance so that you know if the people that you actually want to collaborate in person with will be in the office at the same time as you. Mike, any other questions?
I'm still waiting on getting a couple more in, but that was the first one that came over. So if you want to take it a little bit further, I'll let you know if anything else comes in. Okay, so
I definitely see in here in the Q&A from Martin, who's saying, great conversation, especially Sacha and Priscilla, love to hear about how you deal with different interests with everyone being remote, especially across different functions and divisions. So Priscilla, I will give this to you to talk about how to, like you said, your role is very cross-functional. And so how do you, back to influence maybe, like how do you influence all those stakeholders across different functions and divisions?
Yeah, I think it's definitely a stakeholder management exercise, which actually Sacha helped us think through as well as a team. And how you go about doing your business has really changed during COVID, and will continue to be different when we go back to hybrid. So the water cooler conversation doesn't happen. The casual catch you to talk about something. So we've actually thought through how to use chat as a functionality. And I'll give as an example. We created a run rule of an operating model for our group that if we want to just pick up the phone and call somebody, we will chat each other or pick up the phone. If we want to actually communicate information that's sort of like a pre-read or a recap of agreements, we'll use email. And then we'll actually meet if we need to make decision making. And that's actually helped us because to influence through email is very difficult. I mean, you don't know how people are receiving it. Like it could be in a slew of other things. And it's just, one of my coworkers has always said, email is not communication, it's transmission. And so not to mistake like email as a like tool, because we actually did an inventory and we were overusing email pre-COVID and then during COVID. But getting really directly to the influencing across different functions, I think it really is about relational influence. And that can be hard because we may need to think about, quote unquote, taking a step back in productivity, but it's really not, because you're building the relationship, the connectivity to actually influence decision making. But I found that I need to build in time into my day to build connection and think about how to be helpful to others, so that I'm not just asking for something or driving my agenda, to actually build influence across the different functions in my organization. So, after hours phone calls sometimes, or like giving like feedback to someone to be helpful, trying to build those connections, I think is helping beyond the transactional nature of a meeting where you have decision making, because you're missing that kind of, you have to develop the trust and influence component outside of that Zoom call.
Right, because you can't get to influence unless you have trust, and you can't get to trust unless you have a relationship. Right. And usually we were used to kickstarting those relationships from an in-person perspective. Mm-hmm. And I think the other thing Priscilla brings up that's really important is back to what you mentioned, is basically establishing communication norms. So we're going to use email for this. We're going to use synchronous meeting time for decision making. I liked your, can you tell us a little bit more about the Rumble chat? So I like this idea of using chat for Rumble. Anything more that you could share about that?
When you say Rumble, can you tell me what you mean by
that?
I
thought that was your word. Maybe I misheard you.
Oh, I think it was just saying, like, if it was a thing where you want to just talk with someone, or you would just say casually to them something, you do that chat function, because there's different emotions involved in chats. There's emojis. I mean, there's a whole science around this and how, people are communicating, especially in the younger generation. But that informality actually does build a different kind of relationship than through an email. And then when you actually have group chats, that also creates a different type of connectivity as well. So I think we're using different tools and different mediums to build those points of connection. And I have one person who's amazingly fast is doing emojis. He has an emoji for almost anything that you can think of, or a GIF. It's really, I don't know how he does it, but it's pretty funny.
Well, thanks for that. And so, Mike, I saw you pop back on. So you have another question from the audience?
Yeah, we got a couple more. Now they're coming in. One of them says, in a hybrid model, do you do activities like onboarding remotely or in a location? And do you hire folks anywhere or only close to where you've got offices, even though if they'll be remote most of the time?
So, Mandy, is there anything that you might want to pop in and talk about with regard to onboarding anybody remotely during the past 14 months?
Yeah, that's great. I was going to jump in anyway, so I'm glad you kicked it to me. So we've done some onboarding. It has been virtual where it needs to be, but as people come in, I think it's both. It's a mix and trying to find that balance. One of the things that the company's recently done is put together that program, so there is more of a structure for those people coming in to engage beyond just the task lead and the person that they're working for, to have some of their topics of what's going on in the business. Because before, we would do a great job about bringing a lot of new hires together, new professional, new college hires and interns, and doing, really cool things and engagements and speakers. So we have transitioned that in a really great way to be more virtual. But as people come into the office, there's certainly that camaraderie and trying to take people around, give them tours of the office space as they need to. In terms of hiring, I think sometimes there are jobs, and I won't speak for all from my experience, they really are location-based because we do need to be there for our different sites in our lab. So that's where we are right now for the most part, but there are always exceptions.
Does anybody else have anything to add in terms of something unique you've been doing to help with onboarding people remotely?
All I'll add is we just actually started a rehire over the last 3 months. So it's been recent for us, kind of the revamping and retooling of what it, again, historically been kind of the face-to-face model, and bring them in an office and here you go, we'll talk at you, versus we've got a program we're actually just have built and looking to launch here shortly, where it is got more of the virtual feel, actually more contemporary. So it's a little more interactive. And to the point of jobs, we'd like to keep as many of our roles centered around one of our physical locales, but we're open-minded to a point, in terms of it's got to be based on really job content, job responsibilities, and what makes sense to be in a remote world. But we've got a little bit more of that. We're migrating that way. I don't see it going big bang, but little by little in the right functional areas, there probably is some areas that it is appropriate. But we've started the test drive on some onboarding, and so far so good.
Yeah, a lot of organizations we're working with, again, it's all over the gamut in terms of trying to hire still hub related, or maybe this being an opportunity now to look at talent from the best talent from anywhere to be able to then bring them into the organization.
We've got another question here coming in saying, for planning purpose, would you recommend doing an employee survey or other ways to know their preferred style of working remotely or even in a hybrid environment?
I'll take
Oh, go ahead, John.
That's all right. Joys of virtual here. We actually did a survey about a year ago, but it was like 4 months into the shutdown and transition. So you got one set of data at that point. As we evolve, we got our sound bites, and part of what I was describing earlier, our flexible work arrangement. It's really our leadership group, our management team. They know their people. They know them, pretty well through and through. So at least through that mechanism, we've at least taken a first pass at who we, based on job, but at least with the individual in mind, is knowing what might make sense. In a respective functional area, the hybrid, fully remote, or all in the office all the time. So we haven't done another survey. We've actually gone public a couple months ago just to let our folks know kind of what's coming. And there's at least a broad acceptance. I think, Priscilla may have said it. There's still those unknowns out there, though, that folks, maybe a little skittish because of this reason or that reason. So I'm not sure everybody's fully wrapped their head around yet. Where do I want to be? But we've got a pretty good sense. Maybe roughly 40 to 50% of our workforce wants maybe in some hybrid capacity, directionally. But there's nothing scientific in the number. But we've got some intuition telling us, that's probably where we're going to land. But it's got to be a balance, because you still got to run the business, run your functions, and like I said, some jobs are maybe more conducive to being in an office versus hybrid versus otherwise. So we're looking at that truly as a leadership group, and we'll start to have those conversations as the weeks unfold.
Mandy, did you want to add anything?
I think very similar. There was a point that we had the big survey that went out, and then since then, there's been continuous conversations between the leaders and the employees just to see where they are, and that will still be sorted out with the leadership. But I think it's good that those conversations, there's such an open dialogue at this point.
The point I'll also add to the survey piece. So there's the survey data that you get about what people think that they want, and then there's going to be the actual data about how this comes together in reality, and back to experimentation, right, and seeing how this all plays out through the fall and the months to come. Priscilla and I know very well from doing so much consumer research that sometimes consumers will tell you that they do one thing, and then if you observe them doing it, they do something completely different. So I think that we might expect to see some of that disconnect actually happening. And to John, what you said, like your survey was from a while ago, 4 months in, where things have changed, and people's needs and requests probably have changed since then too. Mike, did we have any other questions?
Nope, it's all you guys. I'll let you all wrap it up, and I'll just jump in to do the housekeeping at the very end.
All right, well, thank you so much, Mandy and Priscilla and to John for being here today to talk about how this past 14 months and beyond has been for the large organizations that they run. And we look forward to seeing, what happens into the fall and into the winter and into next year as the transition happens and your organizations continue to learn how to work in this hybrid virtual environment.
This is great. Thanks for having us.
Thanks so much, everyone. And thanks, everyone, joining us today for participating in this panel.